Hey, Rivers Crossing. Thanks for checking us out again for our podcast. We are in a series called Mind Monsters. We're tackling some feelings, emotions. Maybe today we would classify this one more as a character trait, perhaps, and just diving in and figuring out, one, what do these things look like? Understanding that, pulling some spiritual components out of it that help us get on the right journey, and then just some tangible things of, okay, if this describes me, or if I struggle with this, or whatever language you would wrap around that, how do I deal with that? How do I then get this to not be my identity? Or how do I start to, put this in the right perspective? So today we're talking about stubbornness, which I think is a very interesting one. And I just want to dive in with something that Brett sent to me when we first started talking about this. He sent me a Harvard Business Review article. Love the Harvard Business Review, so you piqued my interest right off the bat. And they have 5 things here that they actually are phrased as signs you're being too inflexible. So you can Google this article later. Stay with us right now, but you can Google this article later. It's on the Harvard Business Review, and it's titled Signs That You're Being Too Stubborn. So you can read the full article later. But I want to read these 5 signs, and then we can kind of unpack these maybe individually, or we'll just see where the conversation takes us. But the first one is you keep an idea or plan instead of making your point when you know you're wrong. We could probably spend 30 minutes just unpacking that one. Just talking about me, we can unpack that one. The second one, you do something you want to do even if no one else wants to do it. When others present an idea, you tend to point out all the reasons it won't work. You visibly feel anger, frustration, and impatience when others try to persuade you of something you don't agree with. I like that one. I want to come back to that one. You agree to or commit half-heartedly to others' requests when you know all along you're going to do something entirely different. And then the next paragraph starts with this line that you and I both liked. Stubbornness is the ugly side of perseverance.
Yeah.
And my takeaway from reading those was off that bullet point number 4, where it talked about feeling anger, frustration, and impatience. Because when I think about moments where I'm stubborn, that usually leads me to an emotion. One of those 3, typically anger. It's what I'm feeling when I'm being stubborn. But I liked how that put it both external, I think is how we usually see stubbornness, but then also internal with some of those of, I'm not going to change my idea for myself, even if I know I'm wrong, even if better options are presented. Like, I know what's right. I'm going to do this. I've made up my decision. No, facts will not change my decision. I'm locked in. How often do you guys see people walk into your offices who are dealing with something and the core problem is simply stubbornness? Or I know you see a lot of couples. How often is this impacting a relationship where they both know something's broken? Person A is, I know it's broken, you're broken. And sometimes person B is the only one that continues to come to therapy, while person A is like, well, get fixed, and then our marriage will get fixed.
That's right.
And they've decided to check out altogether. So how often do you see that scenario play out in your offices?
I think the theme of inflexibility, which we could call stubbornness, is pretty common.
Yeah. Okay.
And we think about a lot of our personality structures that work against us are by definition more rigidly formed or inflexible. And those pieces pop up for a lot of us, but they certainly show up in therapy.
Yeah. So how that word inflexible, I think, brings another perspective to stubborn. I think stubborn, sometimes we already have that. At least I do in my mind. I have that connotation of my father was stubborn. I'm stubborn. Like, I know what it looks like. Inflexible points me in a different light. I don't know why, but I know you and I have had this conversation. You're big Enneagram 1, so are you.
Yeah.
Of this right and wrong. I've decided what's right. I've decided what's wrong. I've decided. It is so. Let it be written.
And I'm right.
And I'm right. Absolutely right. Which is great in our marriage because I'm a 3. So you just want to be right. I just want to win. And our kids are bouncing around somewhere in the middle. How do you help someone take that first step on the journey of sometimes I'm wrong and that's okay?
Yeah.
Self-awareness is, I think, the key to inflexibility, right? If the therapist asks the question, is there anything that could change your mind? If there is nothing that can change your mind, then you're probably being stubborn. No evidence, no fact that could, be grown out today that could change your mind. Well, that's really interesting, right? Because Jesus should be able to change any of our minds on anything at any time, right? I think about Jonah when I think about stubbornness. right? God's like, hey, will you do this thing? And he's like, no, sorry.
Because they didn't deserve.
Right?
They didn't deserve.
Well, he was right.
Yeah.
He was right, and he knew they didn't deserve it. I wrote down Jonah as well in my notes because I still remember a message that Pastor Peter preached here, and he said, the story of Jonah challenges us at the end to reconcile, am I okay with God blessing my enemies? And if we've decided they're bad, then it's easy to go, nope, not okay with that.
That's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can God change your mind?
Yeah. And I think that's the component of, like, you know, you see a couple in therapy or you see anyone in therapy and we're coming in and we're telling all the problems to it. If we're not willing to see that we're both going to have to make some collaboration together, that we both come into a place of like, okay, so yes, we come in saying like, this is the person, they're the problem. If they would just get fixed, it would all be better. Okay, there may be some significant things there. However, what do we need to do? How did we get there? Are we willing to change anything about ourselves if it comes along that there needs to be a change?
Yeah.
Versus that stubbornness is that's the breakdown of most of our relationships, is we're too stubborn to go in and just say, hey, we need some help here. Hey, we need to talk about it. Most of the time I come into therapy and people start talking, like one of them will say like, oh, there's nothing. I think we're fine. And then 15 minutes into it, I'm like, you just gave me all your problems. Like, there's something here. Like, it's the stubbornness. They're like, well, you never said that. You were never willing to go in and have the conversation. We had to be stubborn that my right was right, and I'm not willing to be curious. I love that word, curious, to hear someone else's side to that. And that's a hard place.
Fascinating that the stubborn, because stubborn folks are often a little more reserved in their affect. They're a little more perfectionistic. They do things that they think are right. And in therapy, we can often miss this person, especially in couples therapy, because they look like the intact one. They look like the one who's got it all together, doing all the right things. And their spouse has got all the emotion and is frustrated and can't feel heard and validated. And so they look like the one with all the problems. And unsophisticated therapists will sometimes miss it and then start to target that emotional one.
Sure.
And meanwhile, the ones are like cool, calm, and collected. I'm doing everything right. And they might actually be the source of the marital problem because the inflexibility and their rightness and their inability to see and meet the needs, the emotional needs of their partner.
Yeah, I love, I'm going to keep coming back to this door analogy and all of these because that sets it up well of, okay, when I have this feeling, do I have the door shut to it? So I'm stubborn. I'm always going to be stubborn. I know I'm typically right. I'm not dealing with this. Or is it flung wide open, and I'm impacting everyone around me. I'm just making sure everyone knows I'm right. This emotion is running wild. I am set in my ways. I'm entrenched. I know what I believe. I know I'm right. Those situations and finding that balance, because I would say, I'm married to an Enneagram 1 in Tina, whose discernment from a spiritual perspective is off the charts. Yeah. My discernment is in the basement with my empathy. Like, I know it's down there. I've heard about it. I can hear it talking in the basement, but I've never met my discernment or empathy. So I think there's a really cool balance that took us a while to figure out of sometimes the stubborn person needs to rest so that fun can happen. But sometimes I need to know that stubborn sometimes is right. Sometimes right is right. Sometimes Tina's moral compass as an Enneagram 1 or her discernment to take it to a spiritual place is right.
Right. And the other side of stubbornness is resilience.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So knowing sometimes had I listened to her sooner, our marriage, different paths we've taken at churches, spiritual journey, things like that would have been resolved quicker.
Right.
If I didn't, and I couldn't have put these words to it, at younger age in our marriage and life, but had I understood that her discernment was rising up, that it wasn't, a stubbornness, that I probably could have saved myself some hurt and maybe some other people along the way.
Yeah. We recorded that.
Did you? Everyone can see that.
Well, and I think stubbornness, those who are stubborn don't like to change.
Right.
Right? And I wonder, is it even possible to not change? Or what we know about sanctification, you're either moving towards God or away.
Yeah.
You can't stay still.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah, yeah.
And so stubbornness and the wantingness to not change it's so futile. It doesn't make any sense. And so understanding like, okay, sometimes I have to move towards something or away something. I can't just be all the time.
Yeah.
And stubbornness can get reinforced and rewarded because there is often a rightness about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I'm following the rules. The sweet joked earlier, I'd rather be right than happy.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm doing the things. There's this model in a certain treatment that really focuses on this that I think could be helpful to listeners. And they talk about 2 closed states of mind. So one closed state of mind is fixed mind, and the other one is fatalistic mind. And stubborn people can move between these two. So fixed mind is, I'm right. Like, this is the right thing to do. I'm factually correct. And they can get really wedded to their rightness. And then at some point, they will often move to fatalistic mind, which is like, well, it doesn't matter anyway. Like, it's just not going to work out. And they move between these two. What the goal is, the open state of mind is flexible mind. And so when we're treating people who are struggling with stubbornness, what we're really working on is awareness, openness, flexibility. And that's actually a really difficult thing to do with someone who is wedded to their stubbornness. But it's the goal. How do we get you more flexible? How do we get you more open?
Yeah.
Because they see those things as threats. Those are not like positive things.
Yeah.
Because their fixed and fatalistic mind are like, no, that's dangerous. I'd rather be right. I'd rather have certainty.
Yeah.
And certainty is soothing psychologically, but certainty leads us to all kinds of relational problems. And so stubborn people are often lonely people because people back away from them. They're hard to be around. It's exhausting. And so people move, and then loneliness is the precursor for all kinds of psychological problems.
And sometimes that can come as a result of something that could have occurred in life, right? Where it's control, right? That's the stubbornness is certainty. Well, if I stay in control, then I have certainty.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be because we feel out of control.
That's right.
And sometimes that can exist because we feel like if I keep these things the way they are, we don't like a lot of change. We don't like a lot of like feeling like, flexible, right? All that, right? We don't like just winging it. If we can keep it here, I'm going to stay stubborn here. And sometimes that stubbornness is a coping mechanism and also a protective capacity.
That's right.
Because sometimes you needed it to keep other people at bay that was harm.
That's right. Because some point in their life, it may have saved them.
Yes, sir.
Like in that chaotic family, that traumatic family, the thing that got them out and doing something else is like they persevered. They were stubborn. They were relentless. They followed the rules. They broke all those family patterns, but they've held on it too long and it's no longer helpful.
Right.
Rescued you, saved your life. We can honor that part of you, but now it's working against your relationship.
It's okay to be grateful for what it did for you at the time you needed it. It does not mean we have to continue to operate that way.
And we can practice getting out of it by maybe an hour a day, right? Practicing being flexible, to go to a restaurant and not look at the menu beforehand, right? To not read the Yelp review, to just pick something, or in the morning, not having a routine about it on Tuesdays, allowing our kids to decide how we're going to be flexible today.
Yeah.
Right? We can practice that in small dosages.
Yeah.
We don't have to just throw it out. Mm-hmm.
Right, because sometimes it's good.
Yeah.
There are 2 therapy skills that really, I'm just going to put words to what you just said, which was beautiful, which is engaging in novel behavior. So we take inflexible people and we encourage them to do things they've never done before, because stubborn, inflexible people tend to only do things they're already good at because they don't want to look silly. Right, so I'm going to do that thing I'm really good at, so I'm going to engage in novel behavior. I'm going to try new things, new restaurants, new menu items, and I'm going to participate without planning. So I'm going to go to that restaurant and not look at the menu, or go on a vacation and not have every minute of your day planned.
Yeah.
So that I can do exposure for this. So when there's a group therapy, we really strategize this problem. And for 30 seconds, every group, we do something ridiculous, like act like a zombie, or we mow the grass, or we do chants just because I think it doesn't mean it's true, but only for 30 seconds, because ones on the Enneagram do not want to look silly in front of other people.
Sure.
But the exposure works, and you're part of a group, you're part of a tribe, you're connected.
Yeah.
And so rather than being isolated and lonely in your rightness, you're connecting with people and learning the skill how to not take yourself so seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's taking yourself from what we have defined as comfortable, even though it's probably not as comfortable as we make it because it's quite rigid, are putting ourselves in uncomfortable. Yeah. And uncomfortable is not wrong. It's new. It's different. It's experiencing something.
Unpredictable.
Right? It's unpredictable. And I think you mentioned the stubbornness of Jonah, right? And I also think of like on the opposite side is Esther and her perseverance, like would have been seen maybe for some as stubbornness, that she was doing the things she was doing. But Esther was there persevering for a cause. And she continued to be faithful little by little, opening herself up to new, different things because of the goal was to be in a place to save her people.
When she was constantly fasting,
right,
and open to God changing her mind,
right,
yeah,
that was
right.
Resilience.
That's the difference between Esther and Jonah.
Yeah.
She's like, you want me to stop? I'll stop. This is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you're asking me to continue.
Yeah.
We talk about this idea of being radically open. And really what we're being radically open as a stubborn person is to the possibility of being wrong. So we think about people who love to be right. It's like, I want to be radically open that I missed it, that I was wrong, that I made a mistake, which is really threatening to stubborn, inflexible people like me.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to be wrong. I never want to be publicly wrong. I don't want to make mistakes in front of people.
Yeah.
And when I'm being radically open, it's like, it's okay to be wrong. I don't have to be perfect. And
Yeah.
that's when I'm getting to this place of more flexibility.
Yeah.
It's fear of embarrassment, right? Fear of failure, that you look silly, all the words, right? So it's that component. It really drives that loneliness, because if I keep people away, I don't have to worry about being embarrassed. I don't have to worry about like failing, right?
When these are things that people who are stubborn can do, but maybe not towards the extreme, right? Like a narcissistic personality, right? So these things might not work as well for someone who's in the extreme, right? These are people who are able to understand stubbornness and flexibility and things of that sort. Not that we're never unable, but there's a difference there.
What would you say that the difference even between the narcissistic person and the stubborn person is? The stubborn person is at least aware that they're somewhat stubborn, where narcissism tends to, to void us of all self-awareness.
I
Right.
mean, I would assume so, but
I would agree. Yeah. Narcissistic people, the good news is they can get better.
yeah.
But the real moment for recovery, if you have a genuine narcissistic personality, is when you're depressed. Because depression softens all those defenses, because narcissism is really just covering insecurity.
Sure.
Right. And so depression will take away the armor, the unhealthy armor.
Yeah.
And you can get to like really address the real now.
I love this text that you sent me. I was thinking about this. I was here for one of our 7, 8 Christmas services, however many Christmas services we did. And you sent me a photo of our kids. You remember this? They're making cookies for Santa, for me. They're making cookies for me. Cookies and bourbon is what we leave out for Santa every year. And they're making cookies. And she sent me a photo of the kids making cookies in our kitchen. And she's like, kids are having fun. And then like with asterisks around it, she's like, deep breaths, deep breaths. And I'm like, it took me a second to realize, she thinks the kitchen's dirty. And it's not even dirty. I can see in the photo, it's take 30 seconds to clean up. But she's like, oh God, no.
Yeah.
There's flour on the island. Oh no, what do we do? And just the joy that our family was able to experience. I could see in the photo how happy the kids were.
Right. And she was engaging
new.
in something that she didn't have all the detail. The kids won't let you have all the rules right, and we're going to clean in between. Yeah. Right. So she was stretching into flexibility, which is the goal for those of us who are really wedded to these kind of structures.
Yeah. If I would have allowed stubbornness to stay, right,
Yeah.
we would have never had the experience.
No, never.
We would never had the ingredients to make the cookies.
Yeah.
We would just sat calmly on our.
Yeah, not even a worse version of it, right? Yeah. Yeah, you don't even get a worse version of it, because you're just the idea of flour, of like,
Right. You just avoid.
that
Glitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, all the confetti,
Yeah.
But you don't get the opportunity to experience it if you allow that stubbornness to set in. Like, no, our house has to be this way. It has to. I don't want to clean. No, just let your kids be the kids.
Well, enjoy
And I get to enjoy that.
Right.
That's right.
doesn't have rules.
Yeah, that's why deep breath.
I love that.
Deep breath.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
going to be okay.
Yeah.
This is not a threat.
That idea dies in a grocery store, right? If you don't allow yourself some grace to.
Yeah, you never buy the ingredient.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not going to buy that red, purple, yellow food coloring. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges with stubbornness is the amount of humility it takes to just even identify like this is a part of me.
Well, it feels like we're bumping into pride issues the whole time that we've been talking about this, right? There's a lot of pride issues going on. Yeah.
Yeah, because I can get really arrogant about my rightness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Stubbornness is, see, we didn't think we'd have a lot to talk about, and now we're unpacking, I feel like, every emotion in the world. It's just dealing with stubbornness for a second. I love what you said earlier. You were bouncing off this idea of stubbornness and pulling it to a place of resilience.
Yeah.
Being the opposite of that. So how do you tangibly get someone from stubbornness to resilience? How do you have this internal conversation in a grocery store of, no, we're going to make a mess. And that's where we're going to, we're going to have fun here. How do you begin to shift to that?
I think what's interesting is resilience is not something we're born with. Resilience can be taught, right? And resilience, there are some people who they're going to be better at being resilient quicker. There's some personality types that are more resilient, right? But it can be taught. And I think understanding that first is really helpful. Like, just because I don't have it in me doesn't mean I can't be resilient, right? In Philippians, they talk about resilience a lot in the race. And so I think that's helpful to know.
Yeah, I love that.
Sure.
Something else you mentioned in one of the other episodes was the Atlas podcast on the Enneagram stuff. And not all stubborn people are Enneagram 1s, right? And not all Enneagram 1s are stubborn. But we, I mean, we're 2 for 2. We're 2 for 2 sitting here. But I mean,
My husband's a 1 too.
All right. You live the dream.
But one of the things that I love that you and I talked about when we listened to that podcast, because he has the songs that he makes for every number, but then he does a podcast episode unpacking all the numbers with some experts on there that's really well. And I remember one of the things he says is, when an Enneagram 1 can rest, everyone else can rest.
Yeah.
And I love that. When you allow your stubbornness, because I have it as well. I'm not Enneagram 1. I have high stubbornness. When you allow your stubbornness to melt, everyone else gets to rest in the moment. So now I'm thinking about, okay, we can have some fun with the story about Christmas cookies.
Right.
But now what about the person who their stubbornness has isolated them?
Yeah.
Maybe it's isolated them in their marriage. Maybe it's isolated them with their kids, especially as their kids get older and start to move out of I've created some boundaries here. Or it's isolated them in friendships and work environments. How does that person begin to take some big risks? Because some of that comes from trauma, right? Like I was open before and I was wounded. People let me down because people let people down. So now I'm going to be stubborn in my relationships, which I've created this island of safety,
right?
But now it's an island of safety and loneliness. How do I invite 1 or 2 people onto this island with me?
Yeah.
Feels like a big swim.
Yeah, but as an Enneagram 1 who can go there, my heart goes out to those people because it's not their intention.
Sure.
They really have a desire to have relationship. They desire to, we're designed, how we're created is to have belonging and connection. And so stubbornness has come from a place of first you have to recognize what got me here? How did this happen? And with what's happening from that past experience, is that still occurring today? And am I able to find a place of you know what? Maria, she seems like a pretty cool person. I'm gonna just try to talk to her and do it small, just passing by in the hall, a little social topic. Maybe we'll do coffee sometime. Maybe then we'll do dinner. But it's that slow step of creating that space of I'm not saying go out there and just start talking to everyone and go to the next event. Woo, that's a lot to take on, right? We go small doses.
That's right.
And I think just you find that person that feels safe to you.
Yeah.
And you try that.
Yeah.
And then that leads to another step. And I think that brings down that allowing that stubbornness to rest.
Yeah.
Is when you allow someone to step in that feels safe and secure.
And we'll kind of transition into as we close here of recommending something tangible. It sounds like your recommendation is the exposure that we talked about, I think, in the fear episode. Something small, a hello in the hallway. Oh, that I said hello and that person said hello back. Whew, that was exhausting, kind of deal. How do you also then give grace for that person instead of identifying one person and saying that person will be my accountability partner and they'll have so much depth to them? How do you just allow yourself, I'm just going to get coffee with this person and we'll talk about whatever. And I have no expectations, but 30-minute coffee, right? How do you How do you get to that graceful spot?
Yeah, I think that takes a while. Sometimes the rhythm of people who are inflexible, they can swing into all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So much wisdom about being a little vulnerable with someone who has a little bit of trust. Nail on that. I think it's also, we could throw Enneagram 5 and 8 in here too. They have a lot of like kind of stubbornness. A lot of stubbornness and inflexibility is temperament driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have kind of an inflexible temperament, if you're perfectionistic, detail-oriented, you notice that you're lonely, you may have acquaintances, but going to depth in relationship is hard for you. And being right and stubborn is a component of your personality. I'm going to plug a treatment. It's called Radically Open Dialectical Behavior Therapy. It's one of the treatments I do. It's a 7-month group, and we teach people how to engage in openness, flexibility, how to connect with people.
Is that the DBT or is that another version?
This is another version.
Okay.
It's the Radically Open Dialectical Behavior Therapy.
Okay.
Interestingly, like if you're inflexible, perfectionistic, detail-oriented, you don't move your eyebrows much. And so we even teach people like the value of one like Josh, which is very different than Josh. And like raising your eyebrows gets you out of threat and into more social safety.
I'm thinking about my eyebrows now,
Yeah, that's all I can. I feel very conscious about my eyebrows. Very interesting.
We're teaching. So if you watch someone who's more of a 3 or a 7, their eyebrows are all over the place. 1s and 5s often are like flat. And our facial expressions put other people in threat, which then moves them away from us, keeps us out of the tribe. So this treatment is wonderful. I've seen it change people's lives who are willing to acknowledge there's something about my stubbornness that just does not work, and I'm lonely and maybe chronically depressed. And really great treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's sometimes difficult, probably a lot of times difficult for someone who's stubborn to say, I think you're wrong, but I'm listening.
Right.
And I'm so curious as to why you think you're right. To use that curiosity, to use nuance, because there are very few black and white things in the world.
Yeah.
To say, I really think you're wrong. I think I'm right. And also, can I give you space to try to convince me? And just to ask that and to give that olive branch to your partner or your kid or whatever it might be, even if you don't think that they can convince you.
Yeah.
But to go through the act of trying is a really good first step.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that feels amazing. To say for anybody to say that.
Yeah. But I think a resource I always find interesting with trying to understand, like, am I stubborn? Am I being, perseverance, resilience? I really think understanding your personality type. I think looking at the Enneagram, looking at Myers-Briggs, looking at these different components of even Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown talks about perfectionism. And it's probably one of her longest topics in that book because it really speaks to the way that we tend to act and be. Yeah. So I really like looking at, when I started reading about, my personality, not that I am defined by it, but gives me understanding about it. Yeah. It allowed me to be able to reflect and have some self-reflection there and then be able to say, is that the reason I'm doing that over there?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Is that the reason I feel that way about this or that? That gave me so much. Instead of seeing it from this scope, right, the fixed, narrow scope, I was able to broaden my scope. Yeah, and see it from a larger view.
Yeah, I love that. I've just recently read Atlas of the Heart on your recommendation with someone else on staff here. We just great conversations around it. So I would recommend that book as well. I think we have not watched this yet, but I think she has like a 3 or 4 part miniseries on that book on HBO, maybe, or Prime, one of those. But we should watch that together.
And maybe one last resource
is
if anybody's read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting, and it's like a subtle part of the book, but those who, and you'd have to read it, who don't make it to heaven are because of their stubbornness often. That they stay in this, well, I'm right.
Right.
This is the way it is. This is the way it should be. God cannot change my mind.
Yeah.
They don't make it to the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a fictional, thought process of heaven, but it's a really interesting way to transform how we think about being right and wrong, especially in our relationship with God.
Yeah. Love that. Well, if you listen to this whole podcast and you're sitting there thinking to yourself, I disagree with all of that, you should probably seek some help for being stubborn. Same thing that we've said at the end of the other ones. There's no shame in getting help. So if this challenged you a little bit, save it away, listen to it in the future, send it to a friend. Don't passive aggressively send this one to a spouse. If you want to watch it with your spouse, watch it with your spouse, but don't do that thing. But yeah, if this challenged you in a heavy way, like we've said on the other ones, physical therapy, mental therapy, these are all the same thing. So if you're struggling with something, get some help. You'll be a better person for it, which means, especially with this one, the people around you will be better for it as well. So thank you guys so much for jumping on again.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.